My name is Steve Stafford. Today is April 5, 2024, and I'm in Jackson, Tennessee to interview Judge Joe G. Riley of Ridgely, Tennessee. This interview is taking place as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Judge Riley, so glad that you are here today, so glad that you're participating in this interview. There are a lot of people out there who don't know about Judge Joe G. Riley.
They hadn't missed a thing.
We shall see, we shall see. Why don't you tell us, just as a way of starting out, when you were born, tell us who your parents were, where you were born?
I was born in October of 1947, actually in a hospital in Memphis, although my parents resided in Ridgely. What was the other part of that?
Your parents.
Oh, okay. My parents were Glennard and Charlotte Riley. My father was a lifelong Lake Countyan, just like I have been, and my mother was actually from Dyersburg, Tennessee.
For those of people who are listening who may not know where Ridgely is, could you tell us?
Well, Ridgely is about 15 miles north of Dyersburg, about 100 miles north of Memphis. It is very close to an historic lake, Reelfoot Lake, and we're the last. Our county is the extreme northwest county of the state.
And how large is Ridgely?
Ridgely has some, I'd say, 1,400 people.
Has that been the consistent population, or is it?
That's been fairly consistent back probably 50 years ago. We had more farm laborers in the county, and our population was probably a little bit higher back then.
What is Lake County known for?
Well, Lake County is known for agriculture. It's has very fertile soil. It is a totally flat county. The only hill or rise in the county is the man-made levee, which protects us from the Mississippi River. So it's primarily known for that. And now we have 2 Tennessee state presidents in Lake County, not to be proud of, but it is a big employer for our county.
So Lake County is bordered on the west by the Mississippi River.
On the west by the river.
And bordered on the north by?
Kentucky.
Okay.
And on the east by Obion County, Tennessee, with the county seat being Union City. And on the south by a short stretch of Obion County, but then Dyer County.
You mentioned just a moment ago that your parents, your father was a lifelong resident of Lake County. What about your grandparents?
Well, I didn't, I did not know my paternal grandfather, but he was a lifelong Lake Countyan. He was a farmer. I also understand he was a state senator. That would have been back in the 20s or 30s, I suppose. And I think maybe a justice of the peace, although he was not a lawyer.
What was his name?
His name was Joe Glennard Riley, but everybody called him Seif. That's why he was known, S-E-A-F, Seif Riley. Yeah. My grandmother was a Lake Countyan as well.
But your mother's parents were from?
Okay, now my mother's parents were from Dyersburg. She was from Dyersburg. And her father was in the funeral business. is like second or third generation in the funeral home business.
Okay.
And my grandmother on that side was also a Dyersburg lady.
What do they grow in Lake County?
Well, it has changed over the years in terms of predominant crop. I'd say the predominant crop now is soybeans. Some farmers grow cotton, corn, and wheat primarily. Those are the most prevalent crops.
You mentioned a moment ago that your father was an attorney and a farmer as well. Tell us a little bit about that and how that all worked.
Well, my father and his brother had a very strict father, and I've told you about my paternal grandfather. And he wanted them both to be lawyers. And he also wanted them to get out of school at the same time, the same year. I don't know what the rationale was, but that's what he wanted. And my father was 2 years older than his brother. So my father went to, as I recall, he went to prep school 1 year. And then my father also went to Vanderbilt. So that's a 4 year period. And his brother went to college, and then rather than going to a 3-year law school, he went to Lebanon. I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, the college. Cumberland, okay, you would know. Went to Cumberland, which was at that time, Lebanon, Tennessee, and I think it was a 2-year program. Anyway, it worked out so that they got out the same time, and they started practicing law together. And their father died shortly after they got back home. And he was a farmer, he died in the middle of a crop. So my father took over the farming, relinquished his law practice basically, and they were partners. And his brother took over the law practice. So they had a farming and law practice partnership. They had one checkbook always, paid everything out of one checkbook, which wouldn't ethically suffice now, but they did. They also paid all their personal bills out of this one checking account. And they were extremely close as brothers and never had a cross word. And it's the only true partnership that I think ever really worked. I've always tried to caution other people to think seriously before you get into partnerships, but theirs worked.
How long did that continue?
Well, let's see. They started in around 1938. My uncle died before my dad. He died in, I think, 71, maybe. And then my dad died in 76.
Is that where you got your interest in wanting to be a lawyer?
Well, frankly, my whole goal once I went to college was to come back to Ridgely. I wanted to live in Ridgely. I was a country boy. I loved to hunt and to fish, and that was my primary goal. And it appeared to me the only way I could come back and make a living would be to practice law. So I set my life on that course for that reason, and I held to it.
I want to come back and talk about that in a moment, but let's talk about life in Ridgely. Growing up, tell us how Ridgely was. It sounds a little bit like Mayberry.
Well, I think that's probably true. That's probably true. We didn't have any significant crime problems. Everybody either walked, a lot of people either walked to school or rode their bicycle. Of course, we ran school buses, but it was just a very casual atmosphere. Everybody knew everybody else. And we had, at one time we had like 4 different groceries in downtown Ridgely. Now we have none. And we had a lot of businesses, and businesses were hopping. They were lively, and we didn't have any Walmarts back then, so we had individualized stores, garments and hardware and everything else in between.
Did you work on the farm growing up?
Very little. I didn't have any aptitude for it, frankly, and still don't. I rode around with my dad some, and I tried to chop cotton or I'd try to pick cotton, and I wasn't any good at any of it. Besides that, it's too hard to do. And so I never really had any sincere interest in carrying on the farming operation.
What did you do growing up?
Oh, me, well, of course, sports. Sports, growing up as a kid is baseball, basketball, and football, depending on what season it was, and we'd be in the backyard or whatever playing sports. And didn't watch TV much. I don't think back then the programming was not that great. But pretty much everything revolved around sports, I'd say.
Now, you've got how many siblings?
I have one sister. One sister, she's 2 years younger than I am.
And did you say you have a close relationship with her?
Very, yeah. Her name is Diane Riley Homra, Homra.
And what about your cousins, your uncle's children?
Cousins, actually, my uncle's children, there were 3 of them. 2 girls were twins, and we were in the same grade, grew up together and close, and their brother was 2 years older than I, and he ended up practicing law in Dyersburg.
Okay. When you were growing up, what schools did you go to in Ridgely or Lake County?
Well, actually, we had separate schools in Ridgely and Tiptonville, and
and those are the two main cities.
2 main schools. But I can't omit that we were a segregated school system. So we had, I believe, 2 black schools. One was a high school, and other for first through 7 or whatever. But the white schools, we had 2 high schools. And then my junior year, the 2 towns, which would be Ridgely and Tiptonville, we consolidated into one high school called Lake County High School. And that high school has been there ever since. And the like 1 through 8, they go to either a grammar school in Tiptonville. We also have one in Ridgely. So that's pretty much the school system.
So when you got to high school, you played all 3 sports, I assume?
Well, we didn't really have a baseball program when I was in high school. We did have basketball, and I played basketball some, and then decided to pursue strictly football. So I played football all 4 years of high school.
And what position did you play?
I was a quarterback. Thought I was really super, and I wasn't. I found out later, and when I graduated, we were still segregated. So I missed, it was terrible. But I missed the opportunity to get to play with other races. And I think my sister, who's 2 years younger, I think that was the first year that we officially integrated our high schools.
So you played for Ridgely up through your junior year?
I did up through my sophomore year, and then 11th and 12th grade in Lake County High School.
What was the name of the Ridgely school?
The Ridgely school they had Lara Kendall Elementary
Right.
School, and that's what I attended. and then you went into Ridgely High School.
I know the Lake County's name, they're referred to as the Falcons.
Falcons.
What was the name of the Ridgely School?
Ridgely Green Waves.
Green Waves.
Green Waves.
So I've heard from other people that you also exhibited some musical interest during high school.
Well, my mother and father were both musically talented. My dad sang and he played saxophone, and my mother was almost concert piano organist. My sister is the same way, sings and plays piano and organ. And I didn't really have an ear for it. So I figured if I was going to do anything, I wanted to be a drummer. So that seemed to be an easier path for me, and I could always keep a beat. So matter of fact, we had a band in high school, which was great fun. Great fun.
And you played the band in this, or you played the drums in this band?
Did.
Where did you play?
Well, mostly locally and in Lake County, and we played some in Dyer County, Dyersburg, and I know we went to UT Martin one time and played over there, and some other cities in West Tennessee. But it was a small band, and that was a night out for young people. They enjoyed that kind of thing.
How long did the band last?
Well, my part didn't last but a couple of years because I graduated from high school and went on to college. My sister the same way, and some of the other guys stuck around and continued to play music together, and they were very talented people.
You ever thought about putting the band back together again?
Well, I'd love to. I've tried to talk my sister into playing again, but I can't seem to get her interested.
Is this where you also acquired your interest in dancing?
My interest in dancing, I didn't realize I had that much of an interest anymore. Yes, everybody danced back then. Yeah, absolutely.
So you graduate from high school, and what did you decide to do then?
Well, I've just always understood that I'd go to college, so I went, started at the University of Tennessee at Martin, and I didn't have any confidence in myself, basically, in terms of academics, and so I started there, and I actually I did well, and which was surprising to me and everybody else. So I started getting a little confidence. Anyway, at the end of 1 year, I'd always planned to stay there 1 or 2 years. Then I was going to transfer to Knoxville. So I stayed only 1 year, and I transferred to Knoxville for the other 3 years of college.
How big was your high school graduating class?
I believe, Steve, it was 65 people.
And where did you rank in that 65?
Well, I certainly wasn't valedictorian or salutatorian. I was somewhere around 10, I think, maybe. It wasn't super. I didn't have super grades, but but I made decent grades.
And from what I've been told, you acquired an interest in a young lady in high school in Lake County or Ridgely. Would that be accurate?
Well, I did. My wife is actually 1 year older. We attended.
Well, she doesn't look it.
She doesn't know. I'm sure she doesn't. Somebody told her the other day, she told her, says, "You sure are pretty." Somebody just stopped her at the grocery store. She said, "You are blind." Anyway, she's a hoot. And we started dating in high school. And it carried on, and we eventually married right after I graduated from college, right before I went to law school.
And what would her name
Her
be?
name would be Connie.
Okay.
She was a Donald from Tiptonville.
And she was quite an athlete as well, wasn't she?
As a matter of fact, she was. She was an outstanding basketball player. And some people have probably never heard of this, but they played basically half-court basketball. They had 3 forwards on one end of the court and 3 guards on the other end of the court. And she had a super hook shot, and she was a high scorer, good athlete.
So you go to UTM for a year. At that point in time, were you thinking law school was where I eventually want to end up?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I never really thought seriously about any other profession, so it was just liberal arts, get your liberal arts degree and go to law school. So.
And what did you do during your time at UTM? What kind of social events did you participate in?
Social life was primarily fraternity. I pledged to fraternity Alpha Tau Omega there, and made some great friends, one of whom was a young man named Houston Gordon, and probably one of the best, if not the best, trial lawyer in Tennessee. Recently retired, but fraternity life primarily, but I was only there 1 year, so I had to kind of start all over when I got to Knoxville in terms of making friends.
Did you and Houston start at UTM at the same time?
He's actually a year older, but we pledged at the same time.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you both go to Knoxville after that?
We did. Houston went after, I think he was probably the last class that could do that. He went after 3 years of college. And instead of going the 4th year, you were at that time eligible to go into law school, so that's what he did. And I went 4 years, so that put him a couple of years ahead of me in law school at UT.
Okay. And so, when did you say you and Connie married?
We married in 1969.
And this is before you started law school?
Right. It's right after I graduated, and right after I graduated, I was in the National Guard, and I did 6 months of active duty that summer. And we married when I got back off of active duty in late November.
Tell us about the National Guard time. What was that? Just something that was done? I know that was a draft going on at the time?
Absolutely. And of course we had exemptions when we were in law school, but thereafter, you were not. So I, at the encouragement of my father, who he never really talked to it about it, but he was opposed to the war, the Vietnam War. And he was very patriotic. He served in World War II, but he didn't want me to go. So I dodged the draft. And he helped me politically to get into the National Guard, which you could do back then through political activity. So I'm not proud of that, but that's the truth. And many others, of course, were not able to do what I did and avoid that tragic war. But that's my history, and my father wouldn't have anything else.
Were you in the unit that was in Lake County, or did Lake County have a unit?
Well, actually, I kind of shifted around when I got in. The only place that they had a spot where these political guys like me could get in, it was Memphis, the National Guard in Memphis, Tennessee. So I got in there, and actually from there I went to training. And once I got through my training and once I got back, I was in law school in Knoxville, so I transferred to the unit in Knoxville while I was in law school. And then after I got out of law school, I still had about 3 years left on my commitment. And I transferred to the Dyersburg. So I was a clerk. That's all I was. And I wasn't a soldier, but I'll tell you, it's an interesting thing. Going through basic training, everybody ought to do it. Every male and perhaps every female too. But I mean, having just graduated from college, you'd think that I'd be a pretty independent sort, and I certainly thought I was. But after 8 weeks of basic training, they totally had me brainwashed. I would have done anything that an officer told me to do. I had lost my independent type judgment, and I think that's basically how the Army worked, and that's why it was effective.
After your initial time in the Guard, you did not re-enlist?
No. I did my 6 years and went on with my life.
Wasn't interested in continuing that?
No. I was more interested in trying to make a living and raise a family.
When you got to Knoxville from Ridgely and Martin, what did you think about Knoxville as the big city?
Well, it was exactly that, and my social life consisted of the fraternity, ATO fraternity in Knoxville during those years, because you just didn't have an opportunity to meet other folks in any other place, or it's just such a big campus, a huge campus. So you have to have some group, I think, and the fraternity was my group. And once I got out of college and I married, my wife and I lived in married student housing close to the campus.
Did Connie work while you were in law school?
Oh yeah, she did. She put me through law school, teaching school, and I was trying to remember what she made. This would have been back in '72. I want to say $2,000 or $3,000 a year or something, but it was enough to feed us and get me through law school, and so we did fine on her teacher's salary.
Did you ever think about going anywhere else but Ridgely after you got out of law school?
Well, I know I was law clerking for a law firm in downtown Knoxville. This has been my senior year, I think, and I could walk from the law firm to our apartment in probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It was one Friday afternoon, and I got through and I called Connie and I said, "Do you mind picking me up? I'm just tired." So she did. It took us like 45 minutes to get where I could walk in 25 minutes. And I said, "Hon, ain't no doubt about it. We're going back home. we're not gonna live here in the city." And but that was always the plan. Yeah.
You mentioned your lack of confidence in your academic ability after you graduated from high school. How did that turn out as far as college and law school?
Well, as far as college and law school, I did extremely well academically, and I certainly can't brag on my intelligence because I don't have a high degree of intelligence. I have an average degree of intelligence, quote unquote. So I had to work hard, and I did. I worked hard studying and developing systems, how I would approach tests and things. It took me longer to do well than it would people like you who are naturally smart.
I think you're confusing me with somebody else.
I could be.
So what position did you graduate law school in?
Well, I always tell everybody I graduated first. And the story is that we were on a quarter system back then. And I think I graduated, seemed like maybe winter quarter. I can't, because I started in January law school. I missed the first because I was in the service first quarter. So I started in the winter and I graduated, I don't know. But there was a guy who graduated another quarter who probably beat me, but I'm sticking to my story. I graduated first in my class of one quarter.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 72.
Okay. You were on law review?
I was on law review. And I actually wrote one law review case note, or I don't know what they called it. It wasn't like a full blown article, but it got published in the law review.
So then you took the Tennessee bar.
I did.
Where did you take the bar?
I have no idea. I can't remember where I took the bar. I think in Knoxville maybe, because I know I took the bar review course there.
The Crosley.
Yeah. And so I suppose I stayed around and took the bar there.
So you moved back then to Ridgely.
Ridgely, Tennessee. And see, my uncle had, the law firm was called Riley and Riley forever. My uncle had passed away a couple of years or so before I got back. So the name was still there. My dad was still alive. So it stayed, Riley and Riley. I had a few connections, from the law practice from my uncle. Not many, but a few. I know my uncle did income tax work, and I started doing income tax work. I got most of his clients back then, and I've loved income tax work ever since.
What other type legal work did you start out doing?
Well, it was general practice. I call myself a specialist, and my specialty was estate planning. I had studied that, and I enjoyed that. And then I did that for some farmers, particularly because estate taxes were a problem for farmers back then. You had not only the federal estate taxes, which had a low exemption back then. If you were a farmer, if you owned a couple of farms, then you're probably going to fall in a category where you had to pay federal estate taxes. And there were also Tennessee inheritance taxes. And if you owned a couple of farms, you're going to have to pay Tennessee inheritance taxes. And those taxes could be very substantial for someone who owned farm property. So I started doing that, telling people, drafting wills as to how to avoid, legally avoid having to pay so many estate and inheritance taxes. But that only lasted for about 3 or 4 years, and they changed the tax code on me and left me behind. So I concentrated on other things.
What other work did you do?
Well, real estate work, title work, but anything dealing with real estate, wills, litigation, some litigation. Being in a small county, there wasn't a lot of litigation. But some transactional work. So it was real estate, of course, I think I mentioned that. It was very much of a general practice, and you had to be able to do a lot of different things.
Did you do any criminal work?
Back then we didn't have public defenders, so lawyers got appointed to represent indigent defendants. And we were a small county, so there weren't that many cases that we had in the county, but that's how I got involved in criminal work. I was appointed on a number of cases to represent indigent defendants, and we settled almost all of them.
Did you get paid anything for representing?
Yeah, we did. I think I'm not sure, but it wasn't very much. It's kind of like it is now. I know that's a big problem now, but it was not financially rewarding, of course.
How many lawyers were in Ridgely at that time, or Lake
Well,
County to speak of?
yeah, at that time, probably in the 70s, there were maybe 6 or 7, somewhere along in there, 6, 7, or 8. And now there's, I don't know, maybe, well, there are 2. Like I'm pretty much a retired lawyer. Another lawyer there is primarily a farmer, farmer, primarily a farmer. So there's like probably 3 or 4 in the county now.
Was the economy, the legal business, would it support everybody, all 6 lawyers back then, 6 or 8 lawyers back then?
I guess the answer to that is yes, because, we all survived. And there was a lot more, I don't know whether there was a lot more litigation going on, but, we were in a pretty vibrant county. So you had real estate transactions going on, business transactions going on a fairly regular basis. So, and all the lawyers were general practitioners who'd do anything.
Did you have any mentors back then when you began to practice law? I know your father was still alive, but he'd been primarily farming, running the farming operation.
Well, I think the answer to that is I did not. And that is one thing about living in a small community. There were certainly lawyers that I looked up to, but I can't really say that I had a mentor. And it was pretty much trial and error. And it's kind of like it was when I was a trial court judge when I started.
So you didn't have somebody you could call and bounce ideas off of?
Well, actually I did. And I should not neglect to mention him. He's now deceased, of course. He was an elderly man, a reformed alcoholic who practiced law and was the nicest gentleman you'll ever see. And he practiced out of his home. That doesn't sound that unusual today. But back then, that was unheard of. Every lawyer had an office. You had to have an office for the clients to come to. But he practiced out of his home. He did his own typing on the old typewriter. And he had some general experience, most of it transactional, but a little bit of litigation too. And I'd call him for advice, and he would freely give me advice.
Were you friends with other attorneys, maybe not from Lake County? Did you have relationships with anybody else?
Well, yes, I would meet other people at bar functions, at court, maybe if I was in court in another county. Of course, Houston Gordon and I remained good friends. He practiced law in Covington back in the 70s, and so our friendship remained. But it was primarily through bar-type activities, court, and my relationship with Houston, I would say.
Back in those days, Lake County was in what judicial district?
Back then, I don't recall. I'm not even sure what it is now. What is it, 28th? Or
29.
29? At 29. I don't recall.
I'm just trying to remember what district or what other counties were in that judicial district.
Well, there were 4 counties in the district back then, and that would be Lake County, Obion County, Weakley County. What did I say? Lake, Obion, Weakley, and Dyer. There were 4 counties in the district. And in 1978, legislatively, they divided the district basically in half, where Lake and Dyer County were to be together, and Obion and Weakley were to be together. And that's when I went on the bench. I was elected to fill that vacancy for the 2 counties.
You're getting a bit ahead of me here a little bit. So who were the judges, if you can recall, in the district when you started?
Well, we had Judge Phil Harris from Dresden, and he was serving all 4 counties. Also had a chancellor. And back that time, I know Homer Bradbury was a chancellor, also from Dresden. In Dyer County, they had I believe they called common law and chancery, or I forget
Law
what
and equity.
Law and equity, was that it? Yeah. Judge Robert Jones was a judge there. They also had a chancellor that came from, I don't know where, but I know Paul Summers Sr. at one time was a chancellor that served Dyer County. But primarily Judge Jones did all the legal work, civil legal work.
At some point in time, didn't they have different circuit districts and chancery districts?
Well, that could be, because that would explain why someone from Trenton, I believe a man from Trenton once served as a chancellor there, and Paul Summers Sr. Was not from our regular 4 counties. So I think that's right. I think they had a different district.
While you were practicing, after you came back from law school, did you ever have any memorable cases?
Well, when I was by myself, I really can't say that I did anything memorable. I didn't have any big cases. The only case that I had when I was practicing law that might be considered memorable, I think, was when Houston Gordon and I represented Lieutenant William Calley as a result of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. And when I say Houston Gordon, and I, as Houston would say, I carried his briefcase. And that's the most accurate description, because he had represented Rusty. We called him Rusty. That was his nickname. He had represented Lieutenant Calley while he was in the Army. He got appointed to represent him on appeal. Houston was an appellate lawyer in the JAG. And when Houston got out of the Army, he kept with the case. He kept representing Lieutenant Calley. So we were involved in a federal district court in Georgia, and got a ruling out of Georgia for relief. And I'll tell you this, it would never work now, would not be appropriate now, and it probably wasn't appropriate then, but off and on we'd go to district court and argue this case over a period of weeks whenever the judge could, work us in. And finally, after the last day, we went back, as I recall, to our hotel room, and we got a call from the judge's office that he wanted to see us. So we're like, oh, damn, what have we done now? And so we show up at his office, and it was just us there. The Army lawyers weren't there. And he said, I want y'all to write this opinion. I'm like, say what? Of course, I was naive back then. I thought it was a great compliment. You know, I didn't think anything about the ethics of it. But we did. And matter of fact, I was in the National Guard at summer camp. I think I was at Fort Benning. And I spent a lot of the time in the library there writing writing opinions. How ironic would that be? But I was that. But so we drafted it, and he, of course, did something with it. I don't know. But anyway, we won, and then we got reversed in the Fifth Circuit of Appeals, and eventually Lieutenant Calley got not exonerated. He got his sentence commuted by the Secretary of the Army, I believe. But it's a very interesting saga, and Houston's writing a book about it. It's about ready, and it'll be an interesting read.
So that case is now officially over with?
Oh, the case is over with.
Okay.
Yeah, it has been for a long time.
Any other interesting cases while you were practicing?
None.
A routine practice of the law?
Routine practice of the law.
So when you got back to Ridgely, you're married, when did the family begin?
Shortly thereafter, yes, my first son was born in 73, and I got out of law school in 72. So our kids were born in 73, 75, and 77.
Well, tell us a little bit about your kids.
Well, I got 3 boys. About drove their mama nuts. They're only being 2 years apart, but we wanted it that way, so they'd grow up together. And it was very tough on the marriage. It's just a lot of work involved, and with kids, you know, that young and that close together. But she survived it.
I think she has mentioned to me on occasion about having 4 children.
Oh, yes, I'd be number 4. Yeah, I decided early on that I was going to be more like a brother to them than a father. That was a deliberate choice of mine, and I'm not sure it was the wise one, but that's the one I made. And I tried to be like that, and we're all like brothers now, for sure, and I'm the 4th child.
Tell us, if you would, the names of your sons.
Well, the oldest is John. He was born in 73. Middle son is David. He was born in 75, and my youngest son is Scott. He was born in 77.
Are they named after anybody specifically?
Well, actually, John was named after Connie's father. His first name was John. And David was not named after anybody in the family. Scott was not, David's middle name is Curry, and that was my mother's maiden name. Scott, his middle name is Donald, and that's Scott's mother's, my wife's maiden name. So they're all family related.
And you said you all had a close relationship.
All did. Grew up, and they were, of course, into sports, and I was a hunter fisherman, and we got to participate in those activities together.
You still do that?
Actually, I do. I still hunt. As you know, I've got a bad knee, and I'm not as mobile as I used to be, but they drive me up right to our duck pit, and I don't know, they drive me up in a side-by-side, which is kind of like a 4-wheeler with a top on it, and they let me out right there at the pit, and they built me a lift So I get out and they push the button, the lift comes up, and I step on the platform, and then let me down. So I'm there, but I've been a duck hunter ever since I was 6 years old. I think I was the youngest person to ever buy a license in Lake County as a hunter. And I think, of course, now you don't have to have one if you're 6, but back then I think you had to have a license no matter how old you were. But yeah, that's been an activity that I've enjoyed.
And they duck hunt as well?
They do, all 3 of them. Yeah.
Good, good. What do they all do? What are their careers?
Well, John, the oldest, runs an agribusiness concern there in Lake County. It's a pretty big operation. They do crop applications, fertilizer, seed, spray, and that kind of thing. Middle son is a lawyer in Memphis with the Glassman firm. That's David. He's been there for over 20 years, about. And Scott is an entrepreneur of the family. He's a businessman and owns one lawn treatment company. They spray lawns and fertilizer and that kind of thing on residential and business properties, and he owns a termite and pest control business too.
And you have grandchildren?
Do have grandchildren. I have 5. Oldest is Sydney. That's John's daughter. She's a free spirit, and at my encouragement, she is now in the music industry in Nashville, not as a singer, but in the business part. She got her degree in something else, and she didn't like it, and I told her I said, what do you like? So she said, music. I said, well, let's go. So she ended up there, had to get another degree, and but enjoys her work. David's child is 6 years old. That's Savvy. Then Scott has 3. Brody, he's 16, and he's got Briley and Brooke. So there are three of them. Briley and Brooke are in their majority now.
Do they enjoy spending time with grandfather?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. We at least all live in a reasonably close area. Memphis, of course, is where my middle son lives. That's the farthest. The rest of us are pretty much local.
I tell you what, why don't we just take a break for a moment, and we'll pick this up in just a few minutes. We were talking during the break, and you mentioned that there was a part of our conversation that you wanted to elaborate on a little bit more earlier.
Yeah, my parents. I was so fortunate to have my parents. They were wonderful, wonderful people, and loving people, and family-oriented people. And there's one part about their life that I've looked back on with mixed emotions. I lived in a segregated society back in the 50s and 60s, and they had lived in a basically segregated society all of their lives. And they grew up thinking that we should not, that Caucasians should not mix and mingle with African Americans. And that was their belief. And that's sad as I look back on it. But on the other hand, that is the way they were brought up. Just like we're brought up with certain feelings and perhaps prejudices. So it's with mixed feelings that I think about their lives and how they taught me, and basically indicated to me that I was better than somebody of another race, which is the essence of that, and that's very sad. And I grew up like that, and finally I was able to see the reality of that and the wrongfulness of that. But that was many years after the fact, and where society had changed, had made some changes, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Let's talk about becoming a judge. How did that come to be? What made you want to become a judge?
Well, I only practiced law for 6 years and grown tired of it in 6 years. And I think, frankly, the reason I was dissatisfied with it is because I suffered from depression and never knew it. That's something that had been in my family. And of course, back then, no male ever talked about depression. And like I say, I had no idea that's what it was. But as I look back on it, I can see that that's what it was. It made me discontent with the practice. But I learned pretty quickly, I did not like people tugging on my coattails all the time. And I did not like the fact that people were depending on me to get a job done for them. That was quite a bit of pressure, even when you know that you're right. And things don't always turn out right, and you've got someone depending upon you that you let down. At any rate, I thought I'd be better at being a decision maker rather than an advocate. And I welcomed the responsibility of it. I didn't mind that. So it sounded like what I had always wanted to do. So as it just happened, as I told you, this district split during my 6th year of the practice, so I ran for the circuit court judgeship and very fortunately was elected in a fluke election by some 100 votes.
What year was this?
It'd be 1978.
And we're talking about, how big was the district at that time?
Well, it was just Lake County, which is a very small county, and I lived in Lake County, and Dyer County, which is much, much bigger. But we had a vote split. Of course, I carried Lake County by a pretty big majority. And my mother, having lived in Dyer County, had a lot of connections. And back then, do you remember having Watts lines where you could call free? That's what we called them, a Watts line. So I had my mother a Watts line, so she stayed on the phone all day long talking to all her Dyersburg friends. And as luck would have it, I say luck would have it, as fate would have it, we had a pastor in Ridgely who died at 42 years old, our pastor in the Methodist Church, leaving small children and a widow. And I simply helped the widow through the process, the death legal process kind of a thing. And obviously didn't charge her anything. Anyway, this preacher's father appreciated that. Now, this is old school. And he appreciated that, and he was determined that he was going to repay me in some way for that. So he started campaigning for me. He lived in New Bern, Tennessee, which is a part of Dyer. And everybody knew him. He was a downtown merchant. Everybody loved him. And he campaigned for me big time. And when the results came in, I was not predicted to be the winner. They were only waiting for, as I recall, one box to come in, and that was in New Bern. Well, of course, I lived in Lake County. Well, New Bern came in, and I won the box. And it was not because of me. It was because of him. And that old school appreciation that somebody has is something to be cherished. And anyway, by that fluke, this little old small town guy from Lake County ended up beating these, and there were two others that were running in Dyer County. So I had the perfect vote split in order, to be able to do it from a small county. So it was just luck and hard work on like my mother's part and these other people that I've told you about.
How old were you at the time?
Actually, I was 30. And as you know, you have to be 30 under the Constitution. But I was about to turn 31. But I thought I'd certainly be the youngest trial court judge in Tennessee until I got to judicial conference and found that there was one other guy, Chancellor Tenny Alice Andradas from Memphis, who was a few months younger than I was, and he was also elected at age 30.
During that election, I've heard about this election often, but during this election, there's a very tragic event that occurs with one of the candidates' family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my primary opposition was a friend of mine. He's a lot older than I was. He lived in Dyer County. He was always nice to me. He's a very gregarious person, loved everybody. Everybody loved him. And I know one time we had, while we were campaigning against each other, we had a dunking contest there in Ridgely, and he and I both participated. So I just asked him to go over to the house to have hamburgers with us. So that's the kind of campaign that we ran. We were friends, and he had hamburgers with us. And at any rate, his son was killed in an accident right before the election vote. And I remember going over to his house and meeting with him. And he was a lawyer. Matter of fact, both of his sons were lawyers. But anyway, I don't know what effect, if any, it had on the election, but I still won, and he was a great, gracious sport about it, and we remained good friends throughout the rest of his life.
Wasn't basically the campaign suspended for a period of time while they were trying to find the son that was lost?
You know that I don't remember about the campaign.
Okay.
It wouldn't surprise me. I would certainly I'd be for it.
So how many votes did you win by?
I believe 117. I believe, and it was like 10,000 votes cast. Anyway, it was really, really close.
So how did you run back then? Was it a partisan election or?
No, it was nonpartisan. Thank goodness. I never had to go through a partisan election. I'd have a hard time doing that. It was nonpartisan, and we didn't live in a metropolitan area, and I ran my campaign with very little money. It didn't take any money. You had to buy posters, yard signs, and that's about it. A little radio time. You may do a video for something, but it would just, you didn't have to raise a lot of money to run a campaign back then, 1978. Now, it may have been different in metropolitan areas, but that is where you have problems, where you have to raise a lot of money for judges. I've always been skeptical of anything like that, raising money for judges. And of course, I'm kind of a purist when it comes to judging. And I will say back when I started, politics was pretty much off base for judges. And there's some ethical rules that told you what you could and could not do, and they were pretty strict. And basically, I was apolitical while I was on the bench. I was not politically active. And that was the same way with other judges. You know, back in that time, everybody knew what the groundwork was. And then it gradually changed over the years from my view. I mean, in my view, it did. And we were beginning to get encouraged to form a relationship with the various legislators and get involved to some degree in politics. And from then on, it's been a rough ride, I think. And I guess that maybe that's just a reflection of society, but it's sad. I think judges tend to be way too political, and people are looking at judges now as people they think that they can control, and that judges should do what the people want them to do rather than what the law requires them to do. And it's tough. It's tough today, and it's probably a good thing that I'm too old to do it anymore.
Did you ever have to raise any money to run an election?
No, I actually I determined I would not take any contributions. Period. And my aunt, God bless her, said, "Yes, you are. You're going to take, I don't know, $200 from me or whatever." And that was the only exception. She's the one that kept me from fulfilling my total promise. But she was a very strong-willed woman, and she was determined. She didn't care what I wanted. she wanted to help my campaign. But like I say, it didn't take much money.
How much was the salary for a circuit judge in 1978, if you can recall?
Well, I can't remember. Maybe around 60. It may be around $60,000. I don't know, 40,000 maybe. I know that the legislature passed a bill so that I believe it was those who came on the bench after 74, before the next term, I believe that's right, they would not get the same increases in pay that the other judges got that were already on the bench. Does that make sense? Anyway, it was something like that. So I was paid less money than my judge in the next county, because he had been on the bench during that whole time. Anyway, so somebody filed a lawsuit, and they were trying to take up money for it, and I said, "No, I'm not going to contribute to the lawsuit." I said, I knew what the job paid when I took it. Okay, it shows character, does it? Well, I had a buddy, Dickie German, the late Dickie German. There'll never be another one like him. God bless him. I loved him to death. And he was in the same situation. He came on shortly after I did in that time frame. I told him what I did. He just told him the same thing. We were close. So, we didn't want to participate in a lawsuit. Well, they proceed with this lawsuit. And anyway, next thing I hear, it looked like they're going to win the lawsuit. No problem. Next thing I know, I got a check in the mail from the state of Tennessee. It's like $13,000. $13,000, hell, I didn't have $13,000. So I called Dickie. I said, "Dickie," I said, "did you get that check?" He said, "Yep." I said, "What'd you do with it?" He said, "I cashed it." I said, "I am too." So much for the principle that I had. It sounded good at the time, but when I looked at that check and thought of what my wife and I needed for our boys, it hit the bank pretty quick.
So your office was where at this time?
Office
How
was,
did that all work?
Well, actually, it worked, back then it worked differently. In the metropolitan area, of course, they'd have some place for you to have an office, but in the rural areas, there wasn't a state office building. So people would either rent an office from somebody else and the state would reimburse them. In my case, I already owned the office. So they paid me a fair market value rental for my office while I was there, and that's the office that I used.
But the majority of your cases were in Dyer County.
Right. And in Dyer County, I didn't really have an office. I had a place right off the courtroom, but it wasn't my base of operation. Let me put it like that. All my computers, and I say computers, back then we didn't have computers, but all my equipment was somewhere else.
Did you drive to Dyer County every day and hold court?
Well, I also had Lake County, but most of my work was in Dyer County. So I drove from Ridgely to Dyersburg on a very regular basis, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week. And Dyer County's caseload was probably a fifth of what it was in Dyer County. I see Lake County's caseload was a fifth of what it was in Dyer County.
What was the political or ethical atmosphere at the time you took the bench in Dyer and Lake County?
Well, what do you mean by political ethical?
Well,
You mean from the perspective of a judge?
yes.
Okay. From the perspective of myself, I think it was pretty much something that I did not concern myself with. I did not get involved with. And I know that certain people were politically minded, and I say certain people, people in the community are politically minded. They may want to have a different kind of judge, but as far as the political atmosphere, that's something I was out of.
Well, let me ask this a different way. Were you surprised by the attempts to influence your decisions by people in the community who thought this was the normal way things occurred?
Well, I remember being in Dyer County and having made a ruling on a case involving the location of a beer store. And this went on all over the state. You couldn't have a package store located within so many feet of a church, that kind of thing. The problem was that they did have some, so it got to be there was an argument about it being arbitrary and discriminatory to let some and not others. And anyway, I'd made a ruling in a beer case, and I came to court several mornings later, and I was met by some county commissioners, like 5 or 6 of them, sitting there waiting to talk to me about it. And one thing I always knew is you don't talk about court with other people. You don't have any ex parte conversations with other people. And they wanted to talk about it, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't discuss it with you. So I remember that. And these are respectable, decent people. They just didn't know. And I also, I had to run. I was elected in 78 for 4 years, and the next term began in 82. For 8 years, I didn't have any opposition. So then in 90, which would have been after, what's that, 8, 12?
12 years.
Yeah, whatever it is, yeah. I had opposition. And that was a very depressing year or two of my life. It's just when you're a sitting judge in a small area and you run against a well-organized campaign against you, and you look around and you see who they are, and you start putting two and two together, you can see the power element in the community. I was very naive up until then, but I could look around the room and see who wants me out, and there were specific reasons for that. I don't think it had anything to do with the lack of integrity. I don't think it did. And that's an eye-opener. That's an eye-opener, and it's horrible that judges have to go through that kind of thing.
Did that color the way you approached relationships with lawyers and political officials during your time on the bench?
Well, I'd like to say that it did not, but I don't think it affected any rulings that I made, but it affected the way that I saw people.
Did you specifically try to keep your distance, I guess, is a better way of asking that question?
Yeah, right. I think I understand what you're saying. I did try to stay away from that and do what a judge is supposed to do. Not that I always did, mind you. But.
How did you know how to be a judge when you took the bench in 1978? You said a moment ago that you did a lot of transactional work, a lot of office type stuff.
Well, it was a brand new experience, but it's something that I wanted to do. So it was trial and error. I didn't really have anybody I could call up because a lot of the work was criminal, and my co-judge back then was Judge Jones in Dyersburg, who was on up in years and didn't do criminal work. So I'd have to call up somebody. We didn't have a one-circuit judge, and that was me. So I'd have to call up somebody in another district and ask them for advice, and sometimes that's not very satisfactory. So it's just doing it. That's the way that I learned. Trying to be fair about it, but it's just doing the work. And once you do it once, it gets easier the second time, and before long you start understanding things.
Did you have any mentors that you relied upon, other judges?
Well, Judge Harris was a mentor, and he was in Dresden. Not Dresden. Greenfield. And Judge Homer Bradbury, Chancellor back then, they were awfully good to my wife and me. The two of them and their wives, they kind of took us in when it came to the judicial conference. Thank you for letting me mention them. But they were mentors, but they were not there. It's a difference if I can, you and I could walk down the hall and find each other. And it's not like that when somebody's, 2 counties away. You just try to pick up the phone if it's convenient. But
was the judicial conference active or of any benefit at this point in time to you?
Well, the judicial conference, Tennessee Judicial Conference, both Judge Bradbury and Judge Harris pushed me to get involved in the Tennessee Judicial Conference, and I did. And the Tennessee Judicial Conference became my family because once you go on the bench, things are different with lawyers. And I don't care what you say, things are a little bit different, and you don't run the same circles anymore. So anyway, the Tennessee Judicial Conference became my family, and I became active in it at their suggestions, and then started teaching in the Judicial Conference, and that led to a whole new type career, which I loved. It gave me the opportunity to do, to teach, which is what I really love to do. Not that I was successful at it, but at least I enjoyed it.
What led you to teaching? Penny White is, I've talked with Penny White about this, and Penny has mentioned that Pat Morrell
Yeah,
had a big impact on both you and she.
Pat did. Penny is like a sister to me, very close.
For those of that people who are listening who don't know who Penny White is, would
right.
share with them who she is.
Well, Penny White is, among other things, she is a former circuit court judge from way out east, Johnston County, in that area. Went on to be in a Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals in a fast time, and then went on in a fast time to the Tennessee Supreme Court, and she got rejected on a retention boat, I believe the only one who has, in a fluke type election where she didn't really have time to respond to certain allegations. But at any rate, she lost her job. But she is one of the smartest people I've ever known. She camouflages it well, like I say to some people, but she's absolutely brilliant in terms of the law. And at any rate, she's very gregarious. And she and I attended a conference in Boone, North Carolina, back in 1994. And it was a conference where basically we were taught how to teach adults. And in our case, we were taught how to teach judges, because it was a judges group that went, and it was led by Pat Morrell from the University of Memphis State University back then. But we came away with that conference with the ideas of teaching, and back then Penny and I were doing seminars, for judges and locally doing seminars, and we talked about someday we want to form a business where we can teach legal seminars to lawyers and make a ton of money. We thought there was a ton of money in that. But anyway, that kind of died. And eventually, Penny and I and John Day were able to hook up and form that business after I retired from the bench.
Yeah, we want to talk more about that in a minute, but I want to get back to your trial judges days. You're on the bench as a trial judge for 18 years?
From 1978 to around 1997, I said about 19 years, 18 or 19 years, something like that.
What did you try primarily?
Well, primarily in terms of caseload, mostly criminal, some civil, but mostly criminal, and its trial work is very much predominantly criminal. Didn't end up trying many civil cases. We had a pretty good bar in Dyer County and a good defense bar, a law firm or two there, and they settled cases that needed to be settled. And whenever you tried one that they were involved in, you knew why. It wasn't a very good plaintiff's case. But I give them credit for, the fact that we didn't have to try many civil cases. Jury trials, I mean.
How many jury trials do you think you tried during your trial court years?
Oh, when I first started, we were really trying a bunch of criminal cases, probably as many as, I don't know. Not that I can compare myself to Memphis, but we tried, over 1,000, jury trials. And
that's civil and criminal both.
Yeah, but mostly criminal. We were trying like, I want to say 75 a year sometimes. What does that amount to? How much a month?
That's all that, you were the only one trying those cases?
Yes. Yeah, that'd be my docket. But we were trying a lot of criminal cases back then, even in a relatively small area.
Had you made a good decision leaving private practice and becoming a judge?
Yeah, I can't imagine where that would have gone. Because I wasn't enjoying it. I felt like that, I had, with my connections with Houston and I had a practice together, and I felt like that good things were going to happen in the future in terms of, making a good living. But I just, that wasn't what I was interested in at the time. And I never look back. Yeah, don't ever regret. I rarely ever look back. I think that's very important for judges. You do, my dad used to tell me, son, you do the best you can, and you make your decision, and you don't look back. But if you don't do the best you can, then you need to punish yourself. You're free to do that. No, I have no regrets.
Any cases stick out in your mind from those trial court years that you still remember?
Well, I'm supposed to have a good answer for that, but I don't. I tried all kinds of cases and all kinds of criminal cases, and I took my job very seriously. I'm not, as you know, I'm not that kind of person. But in terms of judging, I had somebody in mind when I started to be a judge that I wanted to be like, and it was Bailey Brown. Judge Bailey Brown was a federal district judge in Memphis and Houston, and I tried a case before him for about a week. And he just epitomized, I think I used that word right, the kind of judge that I had in my mind that would be an ideal judge. And he was removed from everybody, yet he was nice. He had a good sense of humor, but still rather stoic. You didn't slap each other's back before court began. He had, you didn't go back and talk to him. I don't suppose we certainly didn't. And I don't know, he was the kind of judge I felt like that we needed, and I think I may have paid a price for that because I tried to keep myself kind of separate from the bar, and a lot of lawyers didn't appreciate that.
Did that change during your tenure as a trial judge any?
You mean my behavior? No. Probably should have. But I still kept that image in my mind as to what I thought a judge should be like, and I think I stayed the same.
During your trial judge years, you became active on the court judiciary, I believe, didn't you?
I did. I became interested in ethics. I want to say in around 1984. Maybe I started teaching ethics, judicial ethics back then. And anyway, I ended up getting involved in the Tennessee Court of the Judiciary, which is now called the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct. Is that what it is?
What does that do? Or what's the purpose of it?
Well, purpose is basically to investigate allegations of misconduct against ethical misconduct against Tennessee judges. And I believed more in the education side. I believed that a lot of the problems that judges were having were because they just didn't know any better. They did not realize what the rules were. So my primary approach was to speak at all the conferences that I could, general sessions conferences, judicial conferences, juvenile, whatever conference, speak at and try to educate judges. And of course, there were some cases that we did go forward on. But it's very interesting and eye-opening.
You subsequently became the presiding judge of the Court of Judiciary?
I did, and that role has changed over the years. But I was the presiding judge, and that was a non-paying position. That was when I was still a judge. After I left the bench, I became chief disciplinary counsel for the Tennessee Court of the Judiciary, and that's really what I was talking about investigating and prosecuting judges. I believed more in the education side of that and did a lot of teaching then.
Is it difficult to find fault and let your colleagues know that you're finding fault with their actions?
Well, I never had any problem that I detected with any other judges that I investigated. I made some good friends as a result of, I kid them about prosecuting them. Because it was not intended to be anything unfair on my part, it was not my goal to try to get somebody convicted of anything. It's my goal to work something out and go forward. But now I did have one or two judges that resented that. But you think of all the cases that you get doing that, and when you only have one or two, that's going to happen.
I don't want to jump over a whole lot, but I do want to go to your decision to go to the appellate court. Tell us about that.
Well, after I was on the trial court for a while, I found the most difficult part of it was not so much deciding cases, but was with dealing with lawyers, and more specifically dealing with the docket. You think you're sitting there one day and you've got 40 cases that need to be tried, and you're sitting in your office on a Wednesday doing nothing. How did this happen? So, trying to learn how to schedule and to double set and those kind of things was very difficult. So you spend a lot of time trying to manage the docket. But anyway, I found out after a while I really enjoy judicial writing. I like to take cases under advisement. I was always able to, luckily I was able to do it where I didn't have 5 or 6 sitting there waiting on me to do it at the same time. I was always able to get them out before I pretty much took the next one under advisement. But I enjoyed legal writing. And then it dawned on me, I've got to go through this process. And so I had to pick my time. And there were a time or two that I wanted to do it, and I decided at the last minute not to because of some political reason, probably. Some other candidate had come along. But the opportunity finally appeared, and I was able to get appointed. I was lucky. The other candidates were not politically connected, and I wasn't politically connected because I'd been a judge so long. And so anyway, I was fortunate enough to be appointed by a Republican governor, and I was more times than not Democrat. But and that was on the quiet. I never pushed or attended Democratic, events as a judge, Democrat events.
What was the process then?
Well, it's very similar to what it is now, but basically, you go through. I believe they narrowed it down to 3, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure.
You had to go through a
I know
commission?
there was an interview process, and then they submitted the names to the governor, and then the governor picked one of the 3. So it's kind of similar to the way it is now, I think. But that's the way it was, and politics was not very prevalent in my appointment process.
Who was the governor that appointed you?
Governor Sundquist, Don Sundquist.
You were appointed to the Court of Criminal Appeals.
I was.
And how many number one, or how many students who graduated number 1 were on that court?
Oh, I think I know what you're getting at, and there were some very smart people on the court, and I want to say you may be thinking about Joe Tipton.
I think there were 4
Really,
at some
and
point.
David Wells,
Kerwood Witt.
Kerwood. I didn't realize that.
You.
But it was the greatest court, the Court of Criminal Appeals back then, and I'm not saying anything about them now because I don't know. But we were all good friends. There was no hidden agenda, nobody trying to stab each other in the back. Everybody's willing to work. We'd do anything in the world we could for the other judges. We all got along. We all got along. And for the most part, for most of those years, Gary Wade was our presiding judge, and he did a good job.
Was there a specific reason that you chose the Criminal Court of Appeals as opposed to the Court of Appeals?
Well, I think actually,
Or the Court of Criminal Appeals?
I think the slot came up, but I think I wanted to be on the criminal side because I enjoyed the criminal work more than the civil work, which surprised me when I went on the bench. That surprised me. But, when you do criminal work, you deal with the Constitution every day, and that's just, that's such a challenge. And it's a meaningful thing to think that you've got this 200-year-old document that you still apply every day, almost every day as a criminal court judge.
Do you have any idea how many opinions you authored while you were on the Court of Criminal Appeals?
I don't. I have no clue, but a bunch of them. We were doing a lot of opinions back then, I think more than they're doing now. I believe I'm correct about that. I always believed in promptness. I always believed that that's one thing that the public can tell you about a court system or about a judge. How long does it take? That's not a subjective standard. That's just how many days. You can add it up, and if you're taking too long, that is a measurable standard. And I always believed that judges could be, when we were held to be accountable, which we began to be more so after I started, that is one criterion that people could use to gauge a judge's work, is how long it takes that judge to do an opinion. And it depends on the complexity, of course, but an average time. And are you behind?
During this time, did the Court of Criminal Appeals sit in all different locations. In other words, you traveled from Jackson to Memphis to Knoxville and sat in all of those places.
Back then, we did. We sat in any of the three, and our assignments, we were like all jumbled up. I might be sitting with somebody from Knoxville and somebody from Nashville, and we may be sitting in Knoxville. And we all sat together and at different venues.
You think that's a good thing?
I think it's good. I think it's good. I really think it's good. It gets to be a little bit perhaps more unpredictable for lawyers. I know courts, and I'm not talking about yours, but if you sit together, 3 or 4 of you all the time, then you develop a certain pattern, or lawyers believe that you're developing a certain pattern as to how you're going to rule on specific cases, and it may be different than it is over in East Tennessee. So I believe overall you get a better quality if you mix and match, so to speak.
Thinking about being on the Court of Criminal Appeals, being on the trial court, all the experience you had, did your judicial philosophy, or did you have a judicial philosophy when you started, and did it change throughout the years?
Well, I don't know that my judicial philosophy, I don't know whether this is good or bad, ever changed. I think I maintained the same judicial philosophy, whatever that might entail. Now, I had certain views that I would not allow myself to have when I was a judge. And the one I'm thinking about is the death penalty. I've sentenced 2 people to death. They died in prison before being executed of other causes, natural causes. And I wouldn't allow myself to say, well, this is immoral, or, this is my job. It's my job to be a judge. It's my job to be fair. And if somebody's properly found to be sentenced to death, then I'm going to impose it. Well, since that time, I have actually thought about the death penalty, and I have become a staunch advocate. Let me rephrase that. To be staunchly opposed to the death penalty for a number of reasons, morality being almost the least of them. But it is such an unwise penalty. It is not an effective deterrent. And I remember a Supreme Court justice saying one time, this is years ago, and an older Supreme Court justice, Tennessee Supreme Court justice, saying, well, I know all about the law about the death penalty. He said, my only question is it wise to have it? And that's where I have come down and spoken about it's just not wise. And we could talk about that for hours. But that is an example of something that I'm now free to talk. I'm no longer a judge anymore, and I enjoy that. I enjoy that freedom. I frankly got tired of wearing a mask. I always felt like a judge had to wear a mask when he or she was a judge, particularly when it came to members of the public. I think that they need to see you as being a little bit different than the average person out there.
Any other areas you may have changed your philosophy or your way of thinking about?
I don't think so.
So you spent 7 years on the Court of Criminal Appeals?
About 7 years, yeah.
Why'd you retire?
It's the greatest job in the world. I'd never been afraid of change. That's why I took you in when you were chancellor. Never, you and I changed some things. I didn't believe in the 50-year rule. I ran into that on the Court of Appeals when I first got on, and I said, "Why are you making these assignments by doing this and this?" And they said, "Well, that's the way we've always done it." What kind of reason is that? The 50-year rule. Anyway, I'd always wanted to teach. I got back to what I told you a while ago. I'd always wanted to teach seminars. I loved to teach. And an opportunity presented itself to do that with John Day and Penny White. And at the same time, an opportunity presented itself that I could be chief counsel for the Tennessee Court of the Judiciary. So I could combine those two things. So I did it. I made the leap of faith. And never regretted it. But neither one of them worked out. Neither one of those things worked out. So that's life. And I started mediating. It dawned on me. I said, "Look, I got to do something." I'm not making $1 million teaching the seminars, and I didn't feel like the state was doing right with my other position, and so I started mediating, kind of as a fluke. But I'd taken mediation courses, and it took off.
I want to take you back to the Court of Criminal Appeals
Yeah.
for just a moment. While you were on either the trial bench or the appellate bench, did you ever have any thought about going to the Supreme Court?
Back early on, I don't think I ever saw any time that I felt like there was an opening there for me. Several years later, if I had stayed on or stayed with it, I look back and say, well, I certainly could have given it a shot this time or that time. But at that time, I didn't particularly care to be on the Supreme Court. This was many years ago, and it seemed to me that they were at odds with each other too much, personally or whatever. They didn't. Let me put it like, they did not seem to be as collegial as the court, as the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals that I was on. And it just didn't really, that kind of situation didn't interest me. Now, I'm not saying it's like that now at all. And this was years ago, and different personalities, come and go. But, we all trusted each other, and we didn't have any special set of rules to prevent this, that, or the other. And it just appeared to me that I'd rather do something else.
Let's take a brief break for just a few moments. Tell me about the Golden Gavels. What are they? How did they come into being?
Well, years ago, my good friend, the late Dickie German, and I instituted the Golden Gavel Awards. And Dickie and I love to laugh, and both have great senses of humor, and we were good friends, and we always felt like that we needed to do something kind of humorous.
This is for the Judicial Conference?
For the Tennessee Judicial Conference for judges. And the primary purpose was so judges wouldn't take themselves too damn seriously, and we're as human as everybody else, and we need to laugh at ourselves There's nothing wrong with laughter. So we started looking for things that had happened in courtrooms that were funny. Judges made a blooper, or some judge got cussed out by a defendant in the middle of sentencing, and it just took off. So at judicial conferences, we started giving out what we call the Golden Gavel Awards. And we would collect these blooper type materials. Most of them were from Tennessee and related to Tennessee judges. There was some picture, oddball picture of a judge in a newspaper, or just things that are generally funny. And so we started that 27 years ago. And Dickie died a couple of years after we started, and you took Dickie's place. So for the last, I guess, 25 years, you and I have been doing it together. And as you'll recall, at our last judicial conference, I reminded all the judges when we had another set of these that we've been doing it 27 years. And I said, we're the most constant thing in the Tennessee judiciary at this point in time. I said, you judges have come and gone, but we've been here for 27 years doing the same thing. And I think it kind of puts it in perspective. But it's just taking a moment to laugh at yourself and have a good time, because frankly our work can be very serious. It's very serious a lot of times. And we need to take a break and laugh at ourselves. But that's the Golden Gavels, and you know, after I'm dead and gone, I do not care to be remembered as a good judge. It just doesn't interest me at all. I do want to be remembered as it relates to judging. The only thing I want to be remembered for is that I started the Golden Gavels along with Dickie German and Steve Stafford. Other than that, you can put that on the flag and stick her up there. But, it's been a fun ride.
After you retired from the bench and retired from being disciplinary counsel, you decided you were going to embark on a career as a mediator. Tell us a bit about that, what mediation is, why you chose to do that.
Well, I chose to do that because it looked like I had to find some way to support my family, because the things that I had planned on weren't working out. And that being teaching seminars and making a ton of money. Although that we turned out to do that, it didn't make a ton of money. And the same thing with prosecuting judges. I'd frankly had enough of that, and it wasn't working out like I had hoped that it would. But at any rate, so I had been to a mediation course or two before, and this was before mediation became a thing in Tennessee. You know, we're talking about, mediation didn't become a thing until like 1995 in Tennessee when we passed a rule. And when you were chancellor, Steve, you and I started doing judicial settlement conferences, and this was even prior to the rule coming into effect. So we did a pilot program, but it wasn't sanctioned. We just did it, best I recall, and I don't think we did anything unethical. But we started, I'd mediate your cases that were going to go to trial, and you started mediating my cases that were going to go to trial, and first thing you know, we found that like 80 or 90% of them were settling at a settlement conference. And the lawyers finally got used to it, and we were saving, I think, significant court time on cases that could be settled simply because, we had this discussion with the attorneys and the parties. So anyway, that's basically what mediation is. You have a mediator who is a neutral, who meets with the two opposing attorneys and the parties, and usually in Tennessee, it's in a caucus session where the mediator would meet with the plaintiff and the plaintiff's client at one time, then at another time in another room with the defendant and the defendant's client. And you go back and forth, you bring offers back and forth, and there are no fixed rules if you want to bring them together and whatever, but the end result is, out of that process, usually a settlement will result. Statistically, that's what usually happens. It's usually a pretty high figure, depending on what kind of case it is. So these cases end up settling, say 80% of them, and you don't go to trial. And the participants are a lot more satisfied, and they are generally satisfied with the mediation result. At least one of them not going to be too satisfied with the trial result. And a lot of times, neither one of them are. But it is simply a successful technique. It saves lots of judicial time. In a lot of these cases that, people tell us, we go through the courtrooms now, we can't find anybody trying jury trials. Well, the reason is they're being settled at mediation. And so I started doing it, and I thought, because I was a former judge, being brilliant and all, and everybody knowing it, that, hell, I hope y'all know I'm not kidding, serious about this stuff. Anyway, I figured I'd get plenty of business. Well, ain't so. That's just not the case. So I had to start building up practice. And most of the cases were in Memphis, as opposed to Dyer and Lake County, just a handful of cases you can really mediate around here, and I was going to do it full time. So I ended up doing a lot of work in Memphis. And once you get one client and a successful mediation, that usually leads to like 2 or 3 more, and it just snowballs. So I did that, and of course you got to be nice to the lawyers. That's the main thing. You got to slap them on the back and let them know how important they are, because they're your clients now. They're the ones that are going to hire you. And sometimes I was successful at that, sometimes I wasn't. But mediation is a great thing, and it worked out really good for me, and I did it for about 15 years on basically a full-time basis. And I enjoyed it. I finally got enough of it, like everything else I've done, but it was good.
How many, when you say a full-time basis, what would that be? How many cases per week?
Well, I'd be in Memphis, and I might have 3 cases in Memphis, and I might have one in Dyersburg in a given week and one somewhere else. But it was not unusual for me to have 3 to 4 actual mediations a week. Now, I didn't I rarely ever set more than one a day. And sometimes I did, and I just felt like I didn't want to feel pushed. And but sometimes I'd do 3 or 4 a week. And Friday was a day back in the office. I'd have to do administrative work related to mediations, like read the memos for the next week and that kind of thing. But it was lucrative, and it doesn't. You need a staff. You actually could do it yourself probably with a computer, but I had an assistant that helped me with doing all the paperwork and the ordering food. I tried to feed everybody whatever I mediated as a service. But it's good. Mediation is a good thing. It was a great add-on to our judicial system.
I understand it. It's ancillary, but how does, in the grand scheme of things, is it good for the law? And by that, does it develop the law, or does it inhibit the growth of the law?
Mediation? I don't think it inhibits the growth of the law. I'm not really sure what you mean by that, maybe.
Well, the whole idea of hearing cases is it extends the law, it develops the law, it defines the law. How does mediation fit within that? Because you seem to be taking that component out of the court's quiver, so to speak.
Well, I think we have to understand that the reason things are in the court's quiver is because of the people that are to be served in a particular set of circumstances. And if you can get them help through a mediator where those parties are better served by mediating and settling than in a courtroom, that's good. And I think we've made it so that litigation now is so expensive, it costs so much money that it is out of the reach of many people. And that mediation does, in fact, save a lot of money in most instances. And it's the most attractive method of resolution because of that, I think. And, you know, we're not, and to some extent, mediations have taken away lawyers trying cases, you know, because we don't have as many cases to try and we don't have as many lawyers getting experiences. But I think that's just part of the process. That's just the way it's going to be.
I'm jumping back a little bit about what we discussed earlier about your teaching. What was it that you like about teaching?
Well, number one is that you never know whether you're going to do satisfactorily or not. Every time you stand up before people, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And it is a strange thing about it. Sometimes you connect with people and sometimes you don't. And I've done it both ways. And sometimes you feel like you got something really good to do, and but you can't connect. I don't know, and it doesn't seem to be anything personal, but that's just what it is. So number one, it's the challenge of it, and it's number two, it's the back and forth with people. I really enjoy hearing their thoughts, and I really enjoy when you are successful, seeing other people enjoy it. And if you can educate without boring people, that's always been my goal. And as a matter of fact, my primary goal has always been not to bore. That's number one in my book. And then number two was to teach them something. And the way you teach them something is that most people, not all people, but some people can sit and listen to a lecture for an hour and love it and get something out of it. I can't. My mind won't let me do it. And my mother used to say, son, what do you think about the sermon today? And I wouldn't know what she's talking about. She said, you didn't listen? Well, I felt guilty about that. Then I found out I've got a different kind of mind than some people. I learn differently, and I learn by doing or seeing. So I very much believe in education that doesn't bore, that has PowerPoint, that has, this different kind of things to keep people's mind active. So if you can teach and not bore people, and where they actually get something out of it, and they enjoy it, that's tops. Can't beat it.
Have you ever tried to teach kids? I know we've discussed the adult education, but
Not good at teaching kids.
okay.
You know, I've taught, high schools, but I'm not good with little kids, and I don't think I'd be any good at middle school. High school, sometimes it depends on the students if they're interested. That's the main thing about it.
You think it's possible to do a good job teaching today in light of smartphones and iPads and such?
Well, it would be a real challenge for that age group. I mean, for a lesser age group, it's just the attention span situation. It's the same thing with adults. You know, what's your attention span? Because we're getting to do, things differently than we did 25 years ago with smartphones and all. And that's why PowerPoint's so important, I think. It's kind of in some ways, a modern communication technique. And there'll probably be something else come along that's a whole lot better. But
Let's talk about Joe Riley, the author.
oh,
You wrote a book. Tell us about the book, why you wrote it, what you were trying to do.
Short version is that I don't know. I just always wanted to write a book after I got off the bench, and so I kept, when I was mediating, driving back and forth from my hometown to Memphis, and I'd be thinking about a plot, and I finally kind of had a plot in mind, and I kind of started retiring from mediation, getting out of that, and I had some time on my hands, so I started writing my book, which is fiction, and it involves basically a death penalty case in my local area. I don't think I used the names originally or anything, but it's around Reelfoot Lake, so it has some appeal to those who live around here. I say appeal, I don't know whether appeal is the right word, but some relationship to people around here. And it dealt with one of my favorite pastimes, duck hunting, and it dealt with a murder and someone who was charged with the murder, and wherein the death penalty was sought. So I don't know why I'd be worried about giving away the plot, because of course I had several people call me. I get these calls from California and New York saying they want to, they'd like to talk to me about making my book a movie. And everybody says, really? Yeah, write that down. Really? Well, I found out what they want is you damn money. If you give them $500 or $600, they'll lead you on. So I learned pretty quick not to be flattered by those conversations. Anyway, it was fun. It was fun to write. Glad I wrote it. And by the time I paid my publisher, I think I came close to losing not too very much money.
Was the book based upon any real events, and are any of the characters in the book based upon any real people?
Well, my answer is obviously no, for a number of reasons. I don't want to get sued, of course, but it really is not based upon anything in particular. But if you're writing about the topic of murder, and if you've tried a ton of them as a trial court judge, and you read a ton of them as an appellate court judge, it just kind of all blends, and you get certain ideas maybe from this one or certain ideas from this one. So it's just it's a blended thing. But it is not intended to reflect, and some people think that it did, but it doesn't reflect any particular situation.
What's the name of the book?
Name of the book is Reelfoot Killings, spelled Killins'.
Can be purchased at any fine bookstore.
You know, you'll be lucky to purchase it. My publisher went bankrupt and probably is in jail. I don't know, but if you may be able to get it on Amazon if you're really interested. I can't imagine where they're getting it. I promise you, I won't get any money.
I would be remiss if I did not ask you about one engagement that you were asked to attend to promote your book that you shared with me, and I think anybody listening to this video would appreciate hearing that story as well.
Which one was that? Is that
at Sharon?
Oh, Sharon. Yeah, that's what I thought you were
Right.
talking about. Yeah, I got an invitation. You know, when you write a book, you know, you're supposed to go around and promote it, and you get inquiries from libraries, you know, small libraries around the area, and I never got any real invitations from bookstores or places that really mattered much. But I got one from the very small town library, very small town library in Weakley County, and they wanted me to come, and I'm always thinking, you know, you can at least sell some books at these, you know, these library things that people will buy them. I said, I'm trying to think here to myself, how many books do I need to bring? And I said, hey, you know, how many you expect to be there? Of course, it's like an hour drive for me and an hour drive back. And she said, well, there should be, what was it, Steve? I told you. He said, well, at best, there'll be 5 of us. I'm sitting here doing the math thinking, I'm still a businessman. I'm going to lose money even if I sell 5 books. But anyway, I enjoyed meeting these people at the libraries. They're good people and a whole lot smarter than I am.
Jumping around here a little bit, but after you stopped mediating and after you wrote your book, you decided you'd go back and do a little private practice of the law. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, I guess I had a case or two, and had a case or two with my son, plaintiff's case. But here about, I don't know, 5 years ago, I got involved in a couple of cases, criminal cases, in which, frankly, I believed in, rightly or wrongly or whatever, to the chagrin of some, in the innocence of the defendant. And these were people that really, you know, couldn't afford to pay me. They were also people who had other lawyers already helping pro bono. So I volunteered to help pro bono on these 2 first-degree murder cases. And I felt like I had something to offer. I felt like that they could use my experience, not my brains, but my experience, but more than anything, I felt like I owed it to the cause of justice. You know, the cause of justice has been good to me. I wouldn't be here, obviously, But it has been really good. It's allowed me to do things that I'd wanted to do, and without that, I wouldn't have been able to have done those things. But anyway, I felt like I owed it to our system of justice, so I embarked upon these 2 cases with other lawyers too, and spent, I wouldn't know how to guess how many hours. I wish I could have kept up with it, but I didn't have time to keep up with it. It would have taken me forever. These cases have been very involved, very intense. And just, I don't know. But anyway, I've done it, and I've about concluded both of them. One of them we concluded a year and a half ago, and I must say that it's not all fun to win a case, when you're representing someone who's accused of homicide. And there's always somebody else who thinks less of you and thinks that justice wasn't done. So, I don't know. It's just, it's tough sometimes. It's not like it is on television. If you care about people, even people who don't care about you. But the other one I think we've just resolved, and it's not the kind of justice that I would like to see, but it's close enough. It is close enough. But, it's been a long ride, but it's been a good ride. It's been a good ride. I've enjoyed your friendship, and Bill Acree, among others. But judges have been special to me.
In these cases you've touched on, the first one you actually had to try, and the defendant was acquitted. You were part of at least a 3-person team defending that person. What were you doing in that trial? Were you actively questioning witnesses, reading or writing?
The answer is yes. Yes. This is one time where I didn't just simply carry Houston's briefcase. I had to work, not as hard as Houston did, not as hard as Penny White did, and but yeah, and it's a new experience for me. I mean, I'd done a little dabbling, but after I left the bench, I didn't dabble too much in trial work. So this was a different experience, but it came back pretty quickly. I'm not saying I did a good job, but anyway, like I say, it's with mixed emotions that I even talk about that, because some would call me a very disreputable person, even people that I may have known for a while. That's not easy to take, but on the other hand, it just goes with the profession,
So what's next?
What's next? Well, I'm riding off into the sunset, and I don't have any plans to do anything. I work crossword puzzles 7-8 hours a day, a lot of days, and I'm not physically active. I don't plan to be. Spend time around home, kidding my wife. Listen to that damn dog bark. And keep in contact with my boys.
There's a whole generation of judges and lawyers out there who look up to you as their example. How does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, I'd say that's probably bullshit. Where in the world did you hear that? I mean,
It's written down in my notes.
who wrote it?
I did.
Oh, you did. Well, I don't think it much of you as I thought it did. All right, you say there are a lot of people out there that look up to me as a role model?
Yes. I have heard the old saying many times when I was a practicing lawyer that if you looked up judge in the dictionary, you'd find a picture of Joe Riley.
Well, number one, I don't mean to make light of that, and I appreciate your saying that. You know, I'm at heart just an old country boy, and if somebody wants to look up to me, I hope that I have exhibited integrity. And I'm not saying I have. I said I hope. If that's why somebody looks up to me, I hope it's because they think I have integrity, and I hope, from my perspective, I never let them down on that. I'll fail, but I don't want to let anybody down on a lack of integrity.
2 questions. And I smile because we've discussed this before. What would you like to be remembered for? And what do you think you've accomplished?
Well, what I want to be remembered for? Well, that's pretty easy to answer. For being a father who loved his family. That's it. I don't want to be remembered for anything that has anything to do with law. It's all insignificant. Other than I told you the golden gavels, I wouldn't mind that. And the next thing was what?
What you think you've accomplished?
What have I accomplished? I think that, if anything, I might have made the world a little better place on occasion, at best.
Is that your goal?
Maybe it made a little difference maybe made somebody, you and I probably talked about this, but you think I'm having a heart attack, don't you?
No.
You know, I used to mediate in lawyers' offices, and I'd walk in, and the people that I made contact with were the secretaries, the office workers, the legal assistants. You know, there are people out there that just don't get appreciated. So, and maybe I've made some people like that feel more appreciated. Thank you.
One question, and then we'll wind this up. We've talked about the grand scheme of your life. Is there anything out there you wish you'd done different? Of course, you said a moment ago you don't look back too much. And this may not be a fair question.
Well, there are sins, there are bad things that I've done in my life that I wish I hadn't done. Yeah. But career-wise, no regrets.
Anything you want to share with us that we haven't talked about?
No. You did a good job. Thank you. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you. It's been enlightening.